Yesterday I went past Stonehenge early in the morning, and it was an extremely foggy day, really foggy. And the fog was just clearing with the early light, and it had formed a sort of gossamer all over the landscape of ice. There's sort of thin layer like icing sugar all over the trees, every blade of grass, all the hedgerows were all covered in this amazing gossamer. Even the sheep, poor things, were covered in a thin layer all over them of this iciness that made them seem part of the landscape. And there at Stonehenge, there's a sort of there's a special feeling for those of you who might have been there. There's a sense of spirituality, and many people that are interested in spirituality are often attracted to Stonehenge because of this energy that it has. And it set me thinking about that ancient knowledge, you know, the ancient knowledge that is there shown at places like Stonehenge. I mean, it's kind of accepted now that Stonehenge is or was a possible observatory for the stars, which would have encouraged knowledge about the seasons. So that would have been a very handy tool when sowing crops and so forth, and knowing the phases of the moon and whatever. But it was also an astrological site, not astronomical, astrological, because the ancients believed in astrology. I mean, we can tell this when you look back through the old Indian teachings. It seems to go back thousands and thousands of years. I mean, and in Sumeria and places like that, there's the teachings of astrology. So it's likely that Stonehenge was somehow connected with this ancient tradition. And it fascinates me, Stonehenge, because it's a place where you kind of connect a little bit with the ancient past through your unconscious mind. You know, there's a part of us that's still like an archaic person, you know, and I wonder what the people were like in those times, you see, because it makes me think, you know, they had a certain knowledge that wasn't the type of knowledge that we have of technology, but that had a knowledge of the nature of our man. They knew about consciousness, I believe. They had an understanding of where we could take our minds, you know. Nowadays we're kind of crippled really by our own rationality. I mean, when you think about it, you know, we become really lopsided as people. You know, everything has to be rational, everything has to be measurable, everything has to be material based. So we've actually come from these higher levels of consciousness, and nowadays we are actually on a very low level of consciousnness, and it's getting worse all the time because we're all obsessed with YouTube. We're all obsessed with the internet. We all play games you know, which are totally immersing. And we all live a very materialistic life. You know, the things that are important are our jobs, our achievements, our fame, fortune, fancy houses, good cars, relationships, a physically good body. You know, all material. But in those days, people had very little, and they understood things in a different way to what we do. I think they thought very differently. They didn't think with the same logic as we do. Perhaps thoughts came out of the blue, you know, just as we understand thoughts come out of the blue from our intuition and our unconscious mind. And that's how, like, mediumship and clairvoyance works. And it set me thinking about the ancient days. Because I'm a great believer in the idea that there was an ancient civilization that goes back before the times of the Ice Age. That mankind had a hidden history. And there's records of this, in particular in India. As those that follow my blogs and so forth know, I've been deeply influenced by India and had some fascinating, incredible experiences over there where I've accessed some of the very ancient oracles from India. 10,000 years old they claim to be, which would take you back to the times pre-Ice Age, or just, well, would it? Yeah, I'm not sure, but a long way back, whatever. But they talk about an ancient knowledge that was called the Sanatana Dharma, right? And what that basically means, that's Sanskrit words, but that may be a translation from an even earlier language. But the Sanatana Dharma is basically the idea of the eternal knowledge. Now, Dharma is the second word, which means kind of like righteousness, teachings, truth. It's the Dharma, it's the truth. And the Sanatana is like the eternal knowledge, the idea that there's a perennial philosophy, that something that, knowledge gets lost and yet it comes back again. It gets lost again and it comes back again. A sort of universal tradition, I suppose it is, a beginningness, an endlessness of knowledge, a sort of universal teaching. And the Sanatana Dharma is kind of like the first teaching. Now, whether it relates entirely to an ancient civilization, which I think it does, but it certainly means there's an eternal universal truth that we find again and again and again. Now, originally, there were the great teachers in the past, as the traditions and legends tell us, in particular like Shiva, who was based in... Now, Shiva's like a symbol of the Godhead, but also there's writings to say that he was the first yogi, the first person, that there's almost an Adam-like figure who was the first great teacher, who had a number of rishis working with him. And he sent those rishis to all the corners of the earth to spread the teaching in ancient days. And you could sort of you could see that this Sanatana Dharma, this first teaching, is maybe in Egypt, maybe in the Mayan civilization, maybe in ancient China, maybe in Africa, maybe in the Aborigine teachings in Australia. The old ancient teachings that go back, thousands and thousands of years, were seeded around the world, in the knowledge that one day mankind would fall from the higher consciousness that he had in the past and fall into the times of Kali Yuga. Now, Kali Yuga is the age we're in now, which is the dark age, the age of materialism, the age of greed, the age of ignorance. And we live in that age, and we can't deny it, can we, really? The good news is we're on our way out of it. We're coming into the next era, the Dwapara Yuga, which is going to be an age of cosmic energy, really, of refinding of energy, new forms of energy, and the idea of consciousness as energy. There's other ages after that, the super golden ages, as it were, that come after that, that were hard to describe. I'll talk about those on another occasion. But the Sanatana Dharma is what I'm interested in here, because it's in all religions, I believe. I think all religions have the grains of this ancient truth, and the ancient knowledge is still there. It's still amongst us, and it appears in individuals and people. We can connect with it, as I've talked about things like the Akashic record before. Maybe there are ways that we can tune in to the ancient knowledge. And it's my belief, and this is a belief, but there's evidence to suggest this from other people that have been to India, that there are out there yogis that still maintain the ancient traditions of this knowledge, mainly in the Himalayas, but also in Tamil Nadu, because I've come across some interesting people there and met holy men there, and again accessed the ancient books, which have given me a tremendous insight, I feel, into the very fact that these ancient teachings are there, they're true, and they're for us to access today. Because we are in a time that is very difficult, a time of great distress for the world, a time when people are full of fear. And I believe that this knowledge is there so that it can bring us back from the brink of material drunkenness and wake us up into a new era of cosmic consciousness. And I believe that's happening now. And over the next few years, I believe it's going to be very important, because there's going to be the rebirth of the Sanatana Dharma. So what is it? It's not going to be some complicated piece of philosophy that's going to be impossible for the ordinary person to understand. It's going to be it's a very simple thing, basically. It embraces basically everything. It embraces Einstein and quantum theory and all the theories of physics. That's all written already in the Vedas. But the way they go to these things, the way they have their perfect understanding of consciousness, is not through reason and logic, but through consciousness itself, through direct realization. And if we can have this direct realization, we find that we have superhuman powers, every single one of us. I'm not saying just psychics and mediums and people like that have these powers, or holy men. No, everybody has the power of consciousness. And the more it becomes commonplace, the more it becomes part of our lives. Things like telepathy, things like clairvoyance, things like empathy, all sorts of, abilities that we think are unusual at the moment will one day become commonplace. So like I say, it's simple. Cosmic truths are almost so simple they almost seem stuffed, you know. It's like, how would I explain it? It's like, you know, we people can fight with mathematics and science and physics, but the fundamental truths of consciousness boil down to very simple things, like everything is love, you know. Now that sounds crazy, but when one comes into a form of realization, it's all that. That's all it is. And then at the same time, you could say it's all infinite peace. It's all infinite, you know. These sound like daft platitudes, but actually, realization is simple as that. It's as simple as a realization that the nature of things is so simple, so easy. And this is what the quest for consciousness is about, is coming to these things. And why we need it so much now, because in these days we are living in very dark times. But I believe that the Sanatana Dharma, like I said, it's a perennial philosophy. It's there hidden in the ancient texts, yes, it's there perhaps guarded by holy men. But the answers are very, very simple. And this is something perhaps you might do some more searches on, look up. I mean, it's in, of course, here comes a plug, of course, no, but it's in my books as well. I've written a lot about this in Messages from the Universe. But the Sanatana Dharma is something that I believe is going to be a word perhaps that more people are going to talk about amongst the sort of mystical circles. And it's something we're going to discover, and it's going to be reawakened in the years ahead. Jane and I now do our spiritual work for our foundation. All the profits that come from things like our conferences and theatres and workshops and all those exciting things now go into this foundation, which ultimately has the long-term plan of building centres in the UK and maybe around the world one day. But meanwhile, we've been doing a lot of direct spiritual work with it. We've been going out, feeding people in India, giving to the destitute, giving to beggars. We've helped feed schools, helped orphanages, and we've even given cows to older people that have no other form of income. So mediumship can change your life, but it can also help people directly in the world. So go to the links at the end and find out all about what Jane and I are trying to do. And you can do a lot just by sharing these videos on social media. Help us get the word out. Help us to do something really good in this world. Click on this picture of me to subscribe to our channel and see all of our latest videos as soon as they're published. Or click on this next video for more of our stuff.